He taught himself piano at 60 in the building lobby. My daughters were the first to stop and listen. Nobody used the lobby piano. This was not a mystery exactly, more of a quiet fact that everyone in the building had absorbed without examining. The piano had been there since before any of us moved in, an upright Steinway, dark walnut, positioned against the east wall between the mailboxes and the door to the stairwell, slightly out of tune in the way of instruments that are present but not loved. The building management had acquired it years ago as part of some vision of communal elegance that had never quite materialized. A small laminated sign above the keys read, "Residents welcome to play." Nobody did. We walked past it every day. On the way to school, on the way back, on the way to the laundry room and the parking garage and everywhere else our lives required us to go. We walked past the piano the way you walk past a piece of lobby furniture, a sofa nobody sits on, a plant nobody waters, without registering it as something that could be otherwise. And then, one January morning, someone started playing it. I heard it before I understood what I was hearing. I had been in the middle of making lunches, the particular Tuesday morning chaos of two children with different opinions about what constitutes an acceptable sandwich, when the sound came up through the floor. Not music exactly, not at first. More like the careful, halting conversation of someone learning a language one word at a time. A few notes, a pause. The same notes again, slightly different. A longer pause. Then something that almost connected into a phrase before it caught on itself and stopped. June looked up from her orange juice. "What's that?" "Someone's playing the lobby piano," Nora said, already at the door with her jacket half on, because Nora treated anything potentially documentable as a situation requiring immediate presence. "We don't have time," I said, in the automatic voice of Tuesday morning. They were already in the hallway. I followed, as I generally did when my daughters decided something required investigation, because the alternative was waiting in the apartment alone while they investigated without me, which was somehow worse. The man at the piano was somewhere around 60. He sat on the bench with the posture of someone who had not grown up playing, slightly too upright, shoulders carrying tension they hadn't yet learned to release, hands positioned with the careful deliberateness of someone following instructions they'd recently read rather than knowledge that lived in the body. He was playing a beginner's scale, slowly, each note a separate decision. He heard us come down the stairs and stopped. Turned. The expression on his face was the specific combination of embarrassment and defensiveness that belongs to people who have been caught doing something private in a public space. Like he'd forgotten for a moment that the lobby was a lobby and not a room he was alone in. "Sorry," he said. "I thought everyone had left for the day." "You live here?" June asked. She was looking at him with the direct assessment she applied to new people, head slightly tilted, working out what she needed to know. "Fourth floor." He hesitated. "I moved in 3 weeks ago." I saw the sign. He nodded at the laminated card above the keys. "Can you play?" Nora asked. He looked at the piano. "Not yet," he said, with an honesty that seemed to surprise him slightly. "I'm learning." June sat down on the bench beside him with the certainty of someone who has identified where she needs to be. "Can we hear?" He looked at me. I gave him the small shrug of a parent who has learned that redirecting her daughters from something they've decided to do requires more energy than she usually has at 8 in the morning. "It's not very good," he said. "That's okay," June said. "We don't mind." He turned back to the piano. And after a moment's hesitation, began to play his scale again. His name was Robert Osei. He was 62 years old. He had moved into our building from a house in the north of the city where he had lived for 21 years, a house he had shared with his wife Diane and their 2 adult sons until the sons left for university and careers in other cities, and then with just Diane, and then, for the past 2 years, with nobody at all. Diane had not died. This was the part that made his story different from Thomas's and Adie's, and the part that I understood the least at first, and the most later. Diane had left. Not dramatically. Not with betrayal or crisis or any of the things that make a departure into a clear narrative. She had left because they had grown into people who wanted different things from the last third of their lives, and she had been honest about this in a way that Robert described as both the kindest and most difficult thing anyone had ever done to him. She had said, "I love you and I think we have become wrong for each other, and I don't want us to spend the next 20 years making each other smaller." She had said it like she'd been carrying it for a while and had finally decided that carrying it alone was a form of dishonesty. They had separated. Sold the house. Diane had moved to the coast, where she had always wanted to live, and he had always been indifferent to. He had moved into the city, into our building, into a fourth-floor apartment with enough space for one person and the particular silence of a life that had been built for two. He told me this in pieces, over the weeks that followed. But the first morning, sitting at the lobby piano with my daughters on either side of him, and me standing on the stairs with my coffee going cold, I knew none of it. I just knew that he was learning to play, alone, in the early morning hours when the lobby was empty, and that my daughters had decided this was something they needed to be part of. The girls came back the next morning. And the morning after that. This was not something I engineered. It emerged the way things emerge when children have decided something is theirs, gradually, then all at once, until it was simply the shape of our Tuesday and Thursday mornings, the way the park bench had been the shape of the previous year. Except this was closer, just downstairs, and it happened before school instead of after, which meant it was contained in the 20 minutes between finishing breakfast and needing to leave. 20 minutes was enough. Children are efficient with time when they're interested in something. Robert was always there when they arrived, already at the piano, already in the middle of whatever he was working on. This told me something about how early he was waking up, about the hours he was spending at the piano before we arrived. He didn't mention this directly. But the pieces he was attempting grew more complex over the weeks, and the hesitation in his playing slowly, incrementally, became something else, not fluency yet, but familiarity. The difference between a language you're reciting and one you're beginning to think in. June appointed herself what she called the clapping department, which meant she applauded at the end of every piece regardless of how it went. She did this with the serious commitment of someone who has identified a necessary function and is filling it. Robert, at first, looked slightly mortified by this. Then he began to anticipate it. Then, after about 2 weeks, I noticed that he sometimes paused at the end of a particularly difficult passage, before it was technically over, and glanced at June, and June clapped, and he went back to playing with the particular quality of a person who has been given something they needed. Nora took notes. Of course she did. The Park Journal had expanded to include what she called the building record, observations about people and things in our immediate world that deserved documentation. Robert had an entry by the end of the first week. Robert update, lobby piano, January. He is learning to play. He does not play well yet, but he plays like he means it. Observation, some people practice things that make them feel less alone. Hypothesis, the piano is not about music. Further investigation required. The further investigation took the form, as it usually did with Nora, of a question asked at what she considered the right moment. It was a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after we'd first heard him, and Robert had just finished a piece that had actually cohered into something, a simple melody, nothing technically impressive, but played with enough evenness that you could hear what it was supposed to be. June had applauded. Robert had sat looking at the keys for a moment with an expression I was learning to recognize, the slightly surprised quality of someone who has accomplished something they weren't sure they could. Nora said, "Why did you start now?" Robert looked at her. "The piano," she said. "You said you moved in 3 weeks ago. So you started right away. Why?" He was quiet for a moment. The lobby was quiet around us, the particular morning stillness before the building fully woke up. He said, "My wife used to play. Not the piano, she played violin, from when she was young. She stopped when our sons were born because there wasn't time, and then the time came back and she didn't pick it up again, and then the situation changed. He paused. After she left, I kept thinking about that. About the things people set down and don't pick back up. About how a whole skill, a whole language almost, can just go quiet in someone because life interrupted it, and then the interruption became permanent. He looked at the piano. I thought I didn't want to become someone who had set things down and left them there, he said. I didn't play as a child. I don't know if I have any ability at all. But I thought I should find out. Before it's too late to find out. Nora wrote something in her notebook. Then she said, "That's a good reason." Robert looked at her with the expression adults get when children say something that lands exactly right. Like being recognized by someone you didn't expect to be recognized by. "That's a very good reason," I said from the stairs. He looked up at me. We hadn't talked much directly in those 3 weeks. The girls had been the point of connection and I had mostly been peripheral, present but not central. He seemed to register me fully for the first time. He said, "Do you play?" I said no. "But I've always wanted to learn." He said after a pause, "There's room on the bench." I want to be honest about what happened next, because it would be easy to make it into something more graceful than it was. I was terrible. Not in the charming, relatable way of someone who is bad at something but attacks it with good humor. I was bad in the frustrated, self-conscious way of someone who expected to be less bad than they were and keeps running into the gap between what they hear in their head and what their hands are willing to produce. I hit wrong notes. I lost my place. I played the same 4 bars incorrectly so many times that June, who had been deployed as my clapping department, had to exercise considerable diplomatic restraint. Robert, to his credit, did not pretend I was doing well. He said, "Your left hand doesn't trust your right hand yet. That's the main problem. They need to learn to exist at the same time." This was accurate and useful feedback delivered without condescension, which is rarer than it should be. I said, "How do you get them to trust each other?" He said, "You practice the same thing slowly until it stops being 2 separate instructions and becomes one. It takes longer than you think it should." I thought about this more than the piano probably warranted. About the things that take longer than they should to become one thing instead of 2. About the left hand and the right hand of a life, the part that keeps going and the part that is still learning to exist without someone beside it, and how long it takes for them to move together again without each one being so aware of the other. I didn't say this to Robert. But I thought it, on the stairs, watching my daughters and this 6 to 12-year-old man learning the same thing I was learning, which was that beginning again is allowed at any point, and that allowed does not mean easy. By February, the lobby mornings had become something the building knew about. Not intrusively. More the way things become known in apartment buildings, through the thin fact of proximity, through the sound that travels through walls and floors and stairwells, through the neighbor who mentions in passing that she'd heard the piano that morning and it had been nice, actually, to hear it. Mrs. Adeyemi from the 3rd floor started timing her morning departure slightly later. The man in 2B who I'd never spoken to beyond hellos began lingering near the mailboxes on his way out. Nobody pushed. Nobody joined uninvited. But the lobby, which had been a transit space, a place people moved through on the way to being somewhere else, began to occasionally be somewhere in its own right. For 20 minutes in the morning. For the duration of Robert's practice and my daughter's attendance, and whatever it was that had formed between the 4 of us in that lobby in January. Nora updated the building record, piano observation, February. Robert is getting better. Mama is getting slightly better. The lobby is different now. People walk slower through it. Hypothesis: music changes spaces even when it isn't very good music yet. This might be the most important thing I've learned this month. June's clapping had evolved. She now applauded with the specific calibration of someone who understood what she was applauding, louder for the things that had clearly been hard, more restrained for the easier passages, and occasionally, for the moments that came together particularly well, a standing ovation delivered from a sitting position, which was its own charming contradiction. Robert had started bringing tea. This felt significant to me in the way that small rituals do when you've been paying attention. A thermos, 2 cups for the adults, a small tin of something sweet for the girls, appearing on the piano bench beside him when we came downstairs. He didn't announce it. It was just there, like he had decided the morning deserved something better than efficiency. I thought of Thomas and his extraordinary coffee. I thought about the way people signal care through the small, practical things, through bringing the thermos, through the spare hat, through knowing how someone takes their tea before they've told you they prefer it that way. Robert had learned by the 3rd week that June took hers with too much sugar, and that Nora didn't want any, just something warm to hold while she listened. I learned about the full shape of Robert's life in March, on a Saturday when the girls were with Daniel and I came down to the lobby alone and found him at the piano working on something I hadn't heard before, something harder, more sustained, a piece with ambition in it. He didn't stop when he heard me. He finished the passage, then turned. I said, "That's new?" He said, "I've been working on it for 3 weeks. I didn't want to play it in front of the girls until I could get through it without stopping." I sat on the stairs. He turned back to the piano and played it from the beginning, and this time I understood what I was hearing. It was a lullaby. Simple, slow, unmistakably a lullaby, the kind of melody that belongs to childhood in a way that bypasses analysis and goes directly to something older. I said, "Did you choose it, or did it choose you?" He smiled slightly. "Diane used to hum it when our boys were small. She didn't play, the violin had been set down by then, but she hummed this when she was settling them, and I could hear it from wherever I was in the house, and it meant everything was okay, the children were okay, the evening was okay." He paused. "I learned it last because I wasn't sure I was ready for it." "I'm still not sure." I said, "You played it all the way through." He said, "I did." He looked at the piano. "She was a good mother. Whatever happened between us, whatever we became to each other that wasn't quite right, she was a very good mother, and she loved those boys completely. I don't want to lose sight of that in whatever I'm feeling about the rest of it." This was the most honest thing he'd said to me directly, and I understood it was a kind of offering. The same kind Adiz had made on an early morning over coffee, the same kind Thomas had made at the bench, the careful handing over of something true to someone you decided, cautiously, to trust with it. I said, "The rest of it deserves to be felt too, though. Not instead of the good parts. Alongside them." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Your daughters understand that already." "How?" I thought about it. "They haven't been taught yet that some feelings take too much space," I said. "That you're supposed to keep them small so other people are comfortable. They just feel things. And they assume other people are allowed to also." He nodded slowly. "I spent 40 years being very good at keeping feelings small," he said. "Very competent at it. And then Diane left and the house was sold and I moved into a 4th-floor apartment, and I thought, what exactly was the point of all that smallness? What did it protect?" I said, "I don't know. But I think learning the piano at 60 is maybe the answer to that question." He looked at the keys. "Maybe," he said. Spring came, and with it a development I hadn't predicted. Robert's sons called more often. He mentioned this indirectly at first, a reference to a conversation with Marcus, the older one, who lived in Edinburgh, and then something his younger son James had said. I understood after a while that the calls had become a regular thing, that something in Robert's moving and his piano and perhaps the way he talked about his life now had opened a door between them that had been mostly closed. He said, one morning in April, Marcus asked what I was doing to fill the time. I told him I was learning the piano. There was a pause on the phone and then he said, "I didn't know you wanted to play." And I realized, I hadn't known either, until I started. We'd spent 20 years living together, and I'd never told them what I actually wanted, because I wasn't sure I knew. He played a scale slowly. I'm getting to know myself a bit late, he said. But better late. Nora, who had been writing in her journal and appeared to be paying no attention, said without looking up, It's not late. 62 is the middle. Robert looked at her. She looked up. People live to 124 now sometimes, she said, with the authority of someone who considers statistics relevant to all situations. 62 is basically the middle. You have the whole second half to figure things out. Robert and I exchanged a look over her head. The look of adults who have just been corrected by a child and suspect she might be right. He said, That is genuinely comforting. She said, I know, and went back to her journal. By June, Robert could play 3 pieces all the way through without stopping. Not perfectly. Perfectly was not the point, and we had all, by then, understood this without needing to say it. The point was the doing of it, the sitting down on the bench in the morning and attempting something and staying with the attempt even when it caught and stuttered and required starting over. The point was the 20 minutes in the lobby with tea and 2 small girls and the particular morning quality of a building still mostly asleep, before the day required anything of anyone. June had retired from the clapping department by mutual unspoken agreement, not because the clapping had stopped being wanted, but because it had been incorporated into something else, had become part of the texture of the lobby mornings rather than a specific function someone needed to perform. She clapped when she felt like it, which was often, and didn't when she didn't, and Robert had stopped needing the signal the way he once had. Nora's building record entry for June read, Robert update. He can play the lullaby now without stopping. He played it for us this morning and June cried a little bit, which she denies. I didn't write that she cried in front of her because I thought she'd want it to be private, but I'm writing it here because I think it matters that music made her cry. It means the lullaby worked. It was supposed to make people feel held. That's what lullabies are for. Observation: Robert is learning to hold people with the piano. He didn't know he could do that when he started. I read that entry on a Thursday evening after the girls were in bed, and I sat with it for a while. The particular truth of it. That we often don't know what we're capable of offering until we start, tentatively and badly and with considerable wrong notes, to offer it. In August, Robert's son Marcus visited from Edinburgh. I met him briefly in the lobby, a tall man in his mid-30s who had Robert's eyes and a quality of careful attention that I recognized as inherited. He had come for a week, the first time he'd visited his father since the move. He was, Robert told me afterward, surprised by how his father seemed. Lighter was the word Marcus had used. More present somehow. He had heard Robert play. Not a performance, just the morning practice. Marcus had come down early on his second day and found his father at the piano with my daughters on either side and me on the stairs with coffee, and he had stood in the lobby doorway for several minutes without anyone noticing him. Afterward he had said to Robert, I didn't know this was your life now, Dad. I'm glad it is. Robert told me this with the particular careful quality of someone holding something precious enough to handle slowly. My son hadn't seen me happy in a long time, he said. He wasn't sure I knew how to be. Neither was I, honestly. He played a scale. The same scale he'd started with in January, but different now, fluid, unconsidered, the movement of someone for whom it had become a beginning rather than an instruction. I said, Do you know how to be now? He thought about it. I know how to try to be, he said. I think that might be the same thing, or close enough. The lobby piano is still slightly out of tune. Nobody has fixed this, including Robert, who has been told it would be a simple matter and has not gotten around to it. I suspect he hasn't gotten around to it on purpose, the way you sometimes preserve the imperfections of a thing because the imperfections are part of what the thing is. The piano with the slightly flat middle C is the piano he learned on. The slightly off note is in every piece he's played and every piece he'll play, and it belongs there now. The laminated sign still reads, Residents welcome to play. More residents play now. Mrs. Adeyemi from the third floor turned out to have studied as a girl and had simply, for 40 years, not thought of herself as someone who played anymore. She comes down on Sunday mornings. Robert and she have been known to play at the same time, working through different pieces simultaneously, the combination less chaotic than you'd expect, two imperfect things that somehow accommodate each other. The man in 2B, whose name is Philip, cannot play and has shown no interest in learning, but he brings his coffee down on the mornings he hears music and sits in the chair by the mailboxes and listens. Nobody has asked him to do this. He simply does it, the way people do things when they've found a place that lets them be present without requiring anything else of them. Nora's building record has 14 entries about the lobby piano. The most recent one reads, Observation, October. The lobby used to be a place you went through. Now it's a place you go to. Robert did that. He just sat down and started playing, and the space changed around him. Hypothesis: that's how it always works. Someone has to sit down first. She's 7 years old. She keeps being right about things. I've been thinking about beginnings. Not the dramatic kind, not the ones with clear start lines and the sense of a door definitively opened. The other kind. The kind that look, from the outside, like a 62-year-old man playing a scale badly in an empty lobby at 7 in the morning. The kind that look like a mistake, or an eccentricity, or a minor detail in the ongoing life of a building that mostly just wants everyone to be quiet after 10. The beginnings that are actually beginnings don't usually announce themselves. They're too modest for that. They're a decision to try something before it's too late to find out, made in the morning before anyone is watching. They're a scale played slowly, each note a separate decision, in the direction of something you can't quite hear yet but believe is there if you keep going toward it. Robert is still learning. So am I. The left hand and the right hand are still working out their relationship, still learning to exist at the same time without each one being so aware of the effort. It takes longer than it should. This is true of most things worth learning. But the lobby is different now. The space has changed around the decision to sit down and try. Music lives in it, imperfect and present and audible through the floors, and my daughters stop to listen every morning, and sometimes other people stop too, and the 20 minutes before the day requires everyone turns into something that belongs to all of us. Nora will write it in the building record. She writes everything down. June will clap. She always does. And Robert will play the lullaby, the one that means everything is okay, the children are okay, the evening is okay, and for 20 minutes in the lobby of an ordinary apartment building, with tea going warm on the piano and 2 small girls on the bench, and the slightly flat middle C in every chord, it will be. It really will be. There is something I haven't told you yet, about what the piano mornings did for me specifically, not for Robert, not for the girls, but for me, Claire, the woman on the stairs with the coffee going cold who started all of this by following her daughters downstairs instead of finishing the lunches. I had been, in the 2 years since the divorce, very good at forward motion. At keeping the calendar full and the routines intact and the appearance of a life running smoothly. I was good at this the way you become good at things you practice out of necessity rather than choice, competently, efficiently, without much joy in the competence itself. The piano mornings cracked something in that. Not dramatically. Just the small, persistent crack of something that gets let in. It was the practicing, I think. The watching Robert sit with something he was bad at and stay with it anyway, come back to it, choose it again at 7 in the morning when he could have chosen anything else. There was something in witnessing that, in being a person who watched someone begin something badly and continue, that gave me permission for something I hadn't realized I'd been denying myself. Permission to not be finished. Permission to be in the middle of something without knowing where it was going. Permission to be, as Robert had said about himself, getting to know myself a bit late, but better late. I started running in February. Not because I'd wanted to be a runner, I hadn't, particularly, but because I needed something that was mine alone, something with no history, no associations, nothing to do with the life before. I was bad at it. My knees complained. I went too fast and then too slow and had to stop more than I wanted to. I did it anyway, 3 mornings a week, before the piano mornings, before the lunches. June found out and demanded to know my progress the way she demanded progress updates on everything she considered her business, which was most things. I told her I'd run 4 kilometers without stopping, which was true, and she clapped, which was predictable and entirely welcome. Nora added an entry to the building record, Mama update March. She started running. She says she doesn't know why. I think she does know why, but she's still working out how to say it. Observation: sometimes people start physical things when they're trying to sort out non-physical things. The body figures it out first. She was right about that too. What I was sorting out, slowly and imperfectly and with considerable wrong notes, was this: what I wanted my life to look like now. Not the life I'd been maintaining. Not the life I'd planned before Daniel and I had acknowledged, quietly and with real sadness, that we'd become wrong for each other. The life I might actually choose, if I let myself choose. Robert asked me once, in one of the early morning conversations that had become part of the piano mornings, what I would do differently. Not with the marriage, he wasn't asking about that. He was asking more generally. If you could go back to the point before the life you planned became the life you lived, what would you change? I thought about it for a long time. Then I said I think I would have allowed things to be uncertain longer. I rushed toward the settled shape of things because uncertainty felt like instability, and instability felt dangerous. But all the uncertainty was also all the possibility, and I closed the possibility off very efficiently. He nodded. I did the same, he said. I was very good at the settled shape. Very good at the version of myself that was competent and reliable and made no demands on anyone's patience. He paused. Diane used to say I was the most consistently comfortable person she'd ever known, and I always took it as a compliment. She meant it as an observation, and eventually as a sadness. I said comfortable can be another word for absent. He looked at the piano keys. It can, he said. Yes. We sat with that for a moment, the two of us on opposite ends of a similar recognition. He turned back to the piano and played a chord, not part of a piece, just a chord, one of the ones he'd been working on that week, let it ring and then let it go. I've been less comfortable lately, he said. It turns out that's not the catastrophe I thought it would be. June asked Robert in April whether he missed his wife. Not in the probing way. June was direct but not careless. She asked it in the matter-of-fact way she asked things she genuinely wanted to know, because she had decided the knowing mattered more than the difficulty of asking. Robert was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I miss who she was when we first knew each other. I miss who we were before we got so good at being comfortable. He paused. I don't think I miss what we became, exactly, because what we became was two people who had stopped seeing each other clearly, and being in the middle of that was lonely, in a way that's hard to explain. You can be very lonely in a life that looks full from the outside. June nodded. That's the worst kind of lonely, she said. When people can't see it because everything looks fine. Robert looked at her with that expression he developed, the one adults get when children say exactly the right thing. Where did you learn that? He asked. She shrugged. I notice things, she said, in the simple tone of someone stating a fact about themselves. He said, you do? She picked up her tea. We have a friend who was lonely like that, she said. Thomas. He sat on a bench for 6 months before we found him. And another friend who did the careful breathing in the back place. Adiz. They both looked fine until you actually looked. Robert looked at me. I said, they're observant children. He said, they're extraordinary children. Nora, from the bench beside him, said without looking up from her journal, we know. By September, Robert had learned 6 pieces. He had framed this not as an achievement but as a foundation, which I thought was the right way to think about it. 6 pieces were not mastery. They were proof that learning was possible, that the thing he'd started in January had continued, that the beginning had been a real beginning and not just a gesture toward one. His son Marcus had visited again in the summer, this time with his partner, a woman named Sylvie who played cello, badly, with the same cheerful commitment Robert had brought to the piano. They had played together in the lobby one morning, Robert on the piano, Sylvie on the cello she'd brought as an afterthought, and the combination had been imperfect and surprising and genuinely moving in the way that imperfect things often are when the people performing them care enough. June had given a standing ovation. A real one, on her feet, arms above her head. Marcus had laughed and said, "Dad, I've never seen you perform before. You look happy." Robert had said, "I am, mostly. In the new way. The less comfortable way." Marcus had said he didn't know what that meant. Robert had said, "I think it means I'm actually here. The lobby piano is still slightly out of tune. It will probably always be slightly out of tune. Robert has decided this, and the building management has accepted it without fully understanding why, and the rest of us have come to associate the slightly flat middle C with the mornings themselves, with the particular quality of the lobby before 8, with the tea and the clapping department, and the building record and all of it. You can hear it from the second floor if you listen. I listen most mornings now. Before I come downstairs. Just for a moment, standing in the hallway with my coffee, hearing the notes come up through the floor, tentative or fluid depending on the day, always present, always the same imperfect instrument doing its best with what it has. I think about Robert at 62 deciding to begin. About Adiz and the dahlia tubers in Nora's paper bag. About Thomas on the bench with the thermos and the spare hat. About all of them, found or finding, beginning in the middle of things, learning the left hand and the right hand to move together again. I think about my daughters, who sit on benches and in alleys and on lobby piano benches with the absolute certainty that people who are in the middle of something deserve company. Who have not yet learned to keep moving past the person who needs someone to stop. Who document everything because they believe everything is worth documenting. And who are, in this belief, entirely correct. The piano starts below. Robert is beginning his scales. We are going downstairs. We always do. I want to tell you one last thing, because I think it belongs here. On the last morning of October, almost exactly a year after Robert had first sat down at the lobby piano, I came downstairs early and found him there alone. Not practicing. Just sitting, hands in his lap, looking at the keys the way you look at something that has become part of how you understand your own life. I sat on the stairs. He didn't turn around. He said, "A year ago today I moved in?" I said, "I know." He said, "I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I needed to do something different. Something that wasn't the thing I'd been." I waited. He said, "I think the piano was never really about the piano. I think it was about deciding to be a person who tried things. Who sat down and attempted something badly and came back the next day and attempted it again. Who let people hear the wrong notes." I said, "You let my daughters hear the wrong notes from the very beginning." He smiled, still looking at the keys. They were very accepting of the wrong notes. "They always are," I said. He turned then and looked at me, and there was something in his expression that was lighter than the man who had turned around embarrassed in January, catching strangers in the middle of his private practice. Something that had been worked toward, slowly, one morning at a time. He said, "Thank you for following them downstairs." I said, "They didn't give me much choice." He said, "No? They don't, do they?" He turned back to the piano and began to play. The lullaby, slow and unhurried, filling the lobby with its simple melody, the slightly flat middle C present in every chord, familiar now, part of the sound rather than a flaw in it. Upstairs I heard footsteps. The girls, awake earlier than usual, appearing at the top of the stairs in their pajamas, hair uncombed, drawn down by the sound the way they had been drawn down every morning for a year. They sat beside me on the stairs, one on each side, warm and sleep-soft and present. We listened. The piano filled the lobby. Outside, the city was just beginning its day. Inside, for a few more minutes, it was still ours, the four of us, and the slightly out-of-tune Steinway, and the laminated sign, and the early morning that asked nothing of anyone yet. Nora had her notebook. She was already writing. June was already ready to clap. I drank my coffee and listened and thought, this is what it looks like when you let people in. Not the grand version. The small, daily, imperfect version. The lobby version, with wrong notes, and cold tea and children in pajamas on the stairs. This exact thing. This is enough.